one guy, he told his mother, he said, because she picked out a wife for him, he just told her, he says, when I lift her veil, and if she's not pretty, I'm leaving her right there. That's what he told his mom.
I know some men that way. Okay, so the phrase "wife of your youth" refers to obviously, literally their wives, and it has to relate. And it often talks about first love, this kind of thing. So it implies that these people are older. But anyway, what does this passage tell husbands to do regarding the wife of their youth? We see the opposite, don't we? Don't deal with her treacherously. So the implication is what? You're supposed to treat her well, right? And this is exactly the problem that they were having. They were just causing all kinds of problems with that. And he says, therefore, in verse 15, at the end of that, therefore take heed to your spirit, let none deal treacherously with the wife of his youth, all right? And then in verse 14, what is the bond of this marriage made from? Covenant, all right? What's a covenant? Sorry? A vow, yeah. A contract, yeah. And a contract with a vow. And we see a vow and a contract as different, but they're really the same thing. The contract is simply a legal binding that we have our name written down to verify that we can't back out of this. That's our name right there, and we're the one that wrote it. But a vow would be similar, same thing, except it's verbal, right? And it's usually a vow is made in the presence of witnesses for a reason. And that is, if you try to back out of that, you say, I never said that. You got a crowd full of people that says, yeah, you did, right? So that's basically the same thing. It's to hold us to it. And this is, it's a different subject, but when Jesus talked about let your yes be yes and your no be no, that's what he's talking about, is there's no reason that a Christian should ever have to be put in a situation where they have to make a vow before witnesses before they'll keep their word. And so that's exactly what we should be doing. If we say, yeah, we need to back it up, whether there's witnesses or not. We need to have integrity. So anyway, what he's saying here is that they were married by covenant. And so there's a solemn vow that was being made, and it's important to recognize that. We all know that that's how it works. And then from verse 15, who is it that makes them one? Yes. Did he not make them one? Now, we read already in Genesis 2, of course, that they will become one flesh. God is the one who did that. So we know that it's more than the physical relationship that makes them one. It's God who does that, which means that God is in the process of the vow that's being made and the covenant that's being made. He is there with the binding agent, so to speak, there. Yeah. Casey? Did you raise your hand? Oh, you were pulling your shirt down, I guess. Let's see here. What is the ultimate intention of the function of the union created? Why do we have marriage? He seeks godly offspring. Yeah. And that's not the only reason, but it is what he's intending to have from this. And they're not going to be... the chances of them being godly are much higher, again, with a good marriage in there. With both of people on the same team going in the same direction. And he wants them to have good marriages so that they will have godly children, godly offspring. That's what he wants. And, of course, that's what all of us want. So this is why he's given the blessing and the vow and the commitment to each other that we have. And this is a foundation for what we see in the New Testament with marriage. So does this mean that all marriages must have children? And why do you think either way? I know this is a little controversial. Some marriages can have children. That's right. So when he says that God's intention is godly offspring, That does not condemn the people that can't do it, right? It's not a commentary on every single individual family, how they should operate. And thankfully, we don't have that, and we don't have any kind of command as to how many children we should have. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, if you're asking need, it's a matter of semantics. I don't think it's a need as much as it's a good, but probably not a must.
Need, should, and must. Yeah.
It's a matter of semantics, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, you also know whether you're going to be able to bring up those godly offspring.
Yeah.
That's the other side of it. Even if you can have kids.
That's right. I've met plenty of parents who probably shouldn't have been parents. And I can't make the judgment about it. I'm just saying that those kids might have been better off if they hadn't been born. I've seen situations we've all seen situations like that. And it brings up all kinds of scenarios in our minds about people in the world and things like that, but it applies to the church. That's who we primarily are focusing on, and the rest of the world gets to enjoy this as well, but the intention even of ungodly people having children is the same as godly people having children. God wants godly offspring. Everyone's responsible for that. Yeah.
I think one extension of this, every man is full of good and desire to be office of an elder. That doesn't mean that every man should be an elder.
Right. They may not be able to be an elder, may not be qualified, may not be. Yeah, you're right. So it's one of those things that it's something we can aspire to, but it may not be what everyone can achieve. So from this, then, not just that one question, but from this passage, what does this imply about divorce? We actually didn't read verse 16, did we? The Lord God of Israel says that he hates divorce, for it covers one's garments with violence, says the Lord of hosts. Therefore, take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. How does he feel about divorce? Hates it, yeah. I wouldn't suggest that this is isn't funny how our brain starts working. Is this the one that he hates the most? How do we even answer such a question? Because if God hates it, I don't care if it's the most or the least. I don't want to be a part of it. But also it's related to the godly offspring idea. It's related to the vows that they made. And he says, therefore, at the end of verse 16, therefore take heed to your spirit that you do not deal treacherously. I hate divorce, so be careful how you treat one another. That's what he's saying in essence. Yeah. Does violence to the ones that he should protect? Yeah, that's a good point. I don't know if that's a translation or an interpretation. I have no idea, but that's an interesting way to put it from the NIV. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, if you're faithless to your wife, yeah, treacherous, then you won't be raising godly children. Yeah, that's right. And the intention, yeah, everyone who has children, God intends for them to raise them in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But we know that's not going to happen in the world around us. So if we're going to be helpful for people, do we have anything to offer people on how to raise children? Of course we do. We can help people do those kinds of things, and maybe even have a door to enter into their hearts to talk about other things as well. All right, so concerning this passage, what are harmed from a divorce? Affects everyone. Yeah. Right. And a lot of times people go into a divorce thinking, I can finally find peace. And it may bring peace, but it doesn't mean that everyone else isn't affected too. And so it's a bad situation, can be made worse. It affects friends. Oh, that's right. They usually end up like the kids, figuring out which one they're going to go to, or maybe drop them both. Yeah, that's right. Does it hurt in any way? Does it hurt God or God's perspective, or God in any way hurt God? He's related to this. So I'm not suggesting, I mean, it's hard to say hurt God, but can't cause harm to God. But at the same time, he is a part of this process, and his reputation, even in some sense, is going to be harmed by this. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so it harms his glory. It causes grief. Sure, that's right. So there are a lot of considerations. I know these are just touching the tip of the iceberg, but all right. Any other comments about this passage or questions? Let's look in Hebrews chapter 13. This is the last one in this little section. Then we're going to move on into. This has been about purpose, and then we're going to get into function. Hebrews 13, verse 4, marriage is honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Okay, so this is it kind of stands out as not, the verses before and after don't necessarily apply. So it's kind of like the book of Proverbs. He goes from one idea to the other, but it's still related to the overall message of the book of Hebrews. The message of the book of Hebrews is that the more we learn about Jesus and God, the more we draw ourselves to Him and draw other people to Him as well. And so here he's talking about marriage. He says it's honorable among all, and the bed undefiled, but fornicators and adulterers God will judge. Okay, what does it mean to you that it says honorable? How is marriage honorable before all? Maybe we'll ask the question, who is all? Everybody, okay. I would think that this would be a universal thing. Yeah, were you going to say something? Sure. It gives glory to God that the longer you're married, the more glory God receives for that. Does it speak in any way about people who are not Christians who are married? How do we view them? Doesn't the law apply to everybody? Yeah. It does.
I think the all there is all of mankind.
Yeah. I've run into a couple people that kind of seem to, I don't know if they actually said this, but they kind of seem to imply that, if you're not married in the church or you're not married as a Christian, your marriage doesn't count. But I think this passage teaches the opposite of that. We can acknowledge that other people have marriage and that God instituted the institution, right? So that's, I know it's a side point, but it's interesting that it's in there. Marriage is everywhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right, and they're always in a corruption of that, but it's in every culture there is that which is corrupted. So we have the basis of marriage, the foundation of marriage is in every culture. Yeah. Yeah.
you were gonna get in trouble because they recognized he was married and they were gonna.
Yeah, the Abraham. In fact, some of the leaders, people that, Melchizedek, not Melchizedek, I can't forgot his name. Maybe it was the Pharaoh. God said you're going to die because of taking Abraham's wife. Yeah.
This is also, marriage in general was one of the few things instituted by God that even today is still celebrated in the majority of the world. There are way more happy weddings than there are funerals, right?
Yeah.
We are always looking for a way to celebrate that union, no matter who it is, what it is, even if sometimes it may not end up being the best marriage, that wedding is still a celebration.
Yeah.
You want to look at it as to what they mean by honorable, we still celebrate.
That's true. It strikes me there are three things that God has said that man universally accepts, whether they believe in God or not. First one is to have kids, and there's plenty of that going on even without having kids. The second one is marriage, in order to raise up children in the right way, and most people will recognize that's a better situation. And third is Jesus said, and they all began with one accord to make excuses. That's what Johnny Ramsey used to say. Everybody makes that one a priority. So anyway, coming back to marriage, the marriage idea, when people are married in other cultures, we have to ask the question, what does it take to make a marriage? And we can see in every culture, there is both a commitment and a governmental or societal recognition of that commitment. In other words, it's not that they just go off and run off together and sleep together and now they're married. That it was always a commitment that is done in front of people. And whatever that culture is, they had many different practices for it. But yeah. Yeah, okay, so persistence and long-suffering has to be part of marriage. That's right, yeah.
Jason, in every culture, ever since man left the garden, Adam and Eve left the garden, the family has been the basis of that culture and that society.
Mm-hmm.
And in order to have the family, you have to have the marriage.
That's the way it works.
You can look in all of the writings of antiquity that you want to look at, and that's going to look right out at you.
And this is interesting to me, that the way things are set up, because we all know that a bad marriage is really bad. It can get really bad. And we all know that going into a marriage, especially when I was 20 and Carla was 19 when we got married, and we knew everything. We had it all figured out. And we knew exactly how we were going to fit together and make everything work and, all kinds of stuff. But what if we were wrong? There's always the risk when you get into marriage, right? And the risk is, in society universally recognizes this risk. The risk is it may be that there is divorce involved, which is not what God wants, but even worse sometimes, there may be some pretty bad things that happen. In fact, marriage is difficult at best, and it's taxing. It takes a lot out of us, and it makes us mature and grow. But the benefit of the blessing of having a happy, good marriage is far. The prospect of that far exceeds the risk of having a terrible life. And that's not to deny that people don't have terrible lives, but it does, the benefit outweighs the cost. And so we have to assume that there's cost. And assuming that is part of our maturation as well. We're going to assess and say, okay, I know the risk, and we're going to try to make the best of it. And when we try to make the best of it, if we're both trying to make the best out of it, that's one of the reasons that divorce is such a bad thing in society, and why it should be so high. It should not be easy to do, because we need that sometimes. If you go into a marriage thinking, yeah, I'm going to, if we just fight too much, I'll just leave. If that's your attitude going into the marriage, you're going to get a divorce because it's going to tax you. But if your attitude is, we're going to make this work, we can either be miserable the rest of our lives or we're going to make it work the rest of our lives. If that is your attitude, you're far more likely to sit down and work it out than you are to just walk away. And still, sometimes that doesn't work. But I think that's part of what we need in our society. We have quick divorces. That hurts the family in the long run. We need that kind of a bond to force us to do what we said we're going to do. Yeah, Paul? Yeah. That's true. And that's why marriage counselors don't usually want to meet with one at a time. They want to meet together. And I've been through that. I'm not a marriage counselor, but I've talked to plenty of people about their marriages. And usually when they come in, it's about the other person. Well, I can't deal with somebody else's problems unless they're there. But you're right. We have to start. So the first questions I start asking are, okay, how do you contribute to this problem? What's going on in your family? And most people are, I'm completely innocent. I haven't done anything wrong, right? That's the way it works. So you're right. Taking responsibility, though, is the only possible way that we're going to have to make sure that we have a marriage that we could say is happy. And even then, there's no such thing as a marriage that has no problems, right? I mean, it's impossible. Maybe the first few months, maybe the first year or two. It's scary when I talk to people and they say, we've been married for 10 years and we've never had a fight. Like, that's not as good of a thing as you think it is. Now, if you mean having a knockdown, drag-out, fist fight, sure, great. You should go your whole life without that. But if you never have a disagreement in your marriage in 10 years, somebody's not talking. And when you're not talking, you cannot have a good marriage. It's just the way it works. So anyway, that we want to think that having a good marriage means that everybody gets along. And for the most part, we can get along. But when you're facing reality and you have an idea and your spouse has an idea and there's never a discussion of the differences in those ideas, you're in trouble. And you may not realize you're in trouble, but you're in a lot of trouble. Okay, so anyway, what's the main principle here in Hebrews 13 in verse 4? How about just...
I think it's dealing directly with active intimacy. Husband and wife, not husband and wife.
Yes, it is, because he talks about the people who are fornicators and adulterers. By the way, they can overlap. Adultery, incidentally, is fornication is any illicit sexual activity outside of marriage. It actually can include inside marriage too, if you were married to someone and you have activity with someone else. But the activity between a husband and wife is wholesome. That's why he says the marriage bed is undefiled. But outside of that, we have defilement, and that's his point. And adultery relates to breaking of commitments, and it's not just that. It relates to spiritually and physically. So you can break a covenant with God, have spiritual adultery, which is what Israel did by worshiping other gods. That was considered spiritual adultery. We also have what Jesus called spiritual adultery that's kind of physical in that he said, if you look upon a woman to lust, you've committed adultery in your heart already. So that's a form of adultery, but it's not the same thing as fornication. So there's an overlap between those words that we sometimes don't recognize. But yeah, Paul? Pornography is a form of adultery, yes. Yeah. It's not a form of fornication, it's a form of adultery. Yeah.
I think this verse can directly address a lot of the problems people have with that intimacy section in marriages today. Because from my perspective, this is talking about a personal, private, and open, accepted intimacy. Whether, if you're married, you have these polyamorous relationships that people try to
Right.
That's the same thing with fornication. Or if you look at cheating on the spouse as being wrong because they didn't know it, well, that covered under adultery. It needs to be maintained that it's that one husband and that one wife.
Yeah. It's the one and one for good.
Open or secret, just those two.
Yeah, that's true. So that's his point, I think, of bringing out the idea of fornicators and adulterers. God will judge. So who's the one that decided what happens in marriage? God. And it's between a husband and wife, and that's it, right? And that's how it works, and we all know that. And that's why he brings up those two. But those two are valid terms to be used in discussing marriage, and they have overlap, but they're not exactly the same. So is it possible for you to commit adultery but still not be able to have your wife divorce you? No. If your husband commits adultery, that is not the grounds for divorce. He said except for what? He didn't say except for adultery. He said except for fornication. And that's why we need to know the difference. So if a man's looking at pornography, that's adultery. That's not fornication. That is adultery in the sense of going against the vow that he made that his wife is the one who will supply his needs. That is not fornication. Fornication is if he acted on it and went and saw the woman himself and acted on it. So there's a difference, and sometimes we get confused. It's like, well, Jesus said we could divorce for adultery. He didn't. He said you could divorce for fornication, and that's what we have to recognize. Now, if you're married and you fornicate, you're committing adultery. There's no question about that. But you can commit adultery without fornication because of the overlap. There's also other parts of that. So it relates to a defilement of the vow that you made. That's why both words are important in this context, and I think that's kind of what Casey was saying also. Okay, so the main principle here is that the intimacy of the home is by divine decree, and nothing else can touch it. Nothing else matters. Everything else is sinful, put it that way. Okay, so what do these principles teach us about the purpose of God? We've talked about several different passages. Let me just go through real quick what we have discussed, kind of the same. I'm just checking the time. How much we've talked about the principle that relates to this. In Genesis chapter 2, 18 through 20, we have the idea that marriage was created so that the husband and wife would work together. She was made for a helper to him that was suitable to him. The second part of that, verses 21 through 23, marriage is created so husband and wife can find fulfillment together, that they can complete one another, so to speak. That's after he had named all the animals and recognized, I'm missing something here, and God presented her to him. Genesis 2:24 says that marriage was created so that husbands and wives could experience a unity of heart and mind. They become one flesh. And that means that they become united in their cause. They're not just teammates. They're not just roommates. They're not just, have hobbies together. They are united in life, and they're going in the same direction. That's the idea. Psalm 28, marriage was created so that God could bless people through that. And we see there, we have blessings of the wife. We have blessings of having children. All these things relate to God pouring out blessing. It's just an opportunity for him to bless people even more. We also have Malachi 2, which we talked about earlier, and that is he created marriage so that we would have godly children and that they were more likely to be produced that way. And then marriage 13:4, physical needs could be met in responsible and godly ways. All those things relate to what the idea of marriage. So the question is, what do you see here as for, if you're going to put it into a purpose that God created for marriage, how could you put that into an idea?
It's like I said earlier, that marriage forms the basis
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So God created marriage so that humans will have an intimacy that is a foundation for the creation of society. There may be a little more to it than that, but that's pretty much it. So we have this, and it's an intimacy that's important because I've seen a lot of marriages that don't have that. They don't have the one mind idea. They're just roommates, and I've met people. Carl and I have been through times where we felt like we're just roommates. Well, that's not what God intends. What God intends is for us to be united in the one flesh idea, including the mind, headed in the right direction, raising children that will meet the needs of society as well. And do you think that includes grandparents? It's got to. I don't know. I thought when I was younger that when our kids left the house, I was done. Well, sometimes, raising the adult children is harder than raising the children, and we know how that works. But there's only so much we can do. That's why it makes it difficult, right? We can't tell them how to live their lives, but we can help them hopefully see some things they need to do. Okay, so is this purpose still valid? Absolutely. Yeah, Robert, what were you going to say? Yeah, you're right. I mean, Ephesians 5:33 tells us that he said, maybe 32. Anyway, I speak of a great mystery, but I'm speaking of the church, not just marriage, but the church. Yeah, exactly. And if we have the intimacy in one another that's a foundation for society, then that also tells us that our relationship with Jesus is not just one where we're quote-unquote roommates, if I can use that term in that sense. We're united in the same purpose, in the same function. We are together going and he's leading us where we're going, right? So it comes to the heart, and that's what it's all about. Very good. Are there other purposes for marriage that you can think of? When I think about this, I can think of other things like, having fun together, playing games, all kinds of stuff they're like icing on the cake. But when you think about really what marriage is, there's nothing that compares to what God intended for the marriage. And that's what we're seeking, and all those other things will just come as we have the happy marriage, right? Those things will be icing on the cake. It's really hard to have the icing if you don't have the cake. So it causes all kinds of problems. Yeah. Nobody wants to be alone. That's for sure. That's for sure. And you're right. The older we get, the more we start realizing that that's not only that we don't want, but very likely to be. But we can have as long as possible together. That's the idea. And also why the church needs to function in the way it should, because the church is functioning properly. No one should be alone. But I know that's not feasibly possible right now. Yeah. Right. They want to destroy it.
And again, going back, all the way back to the very beginning, God intended for the family.
Yeah. And for most people, it's antiquated, old-fashioned idea. We should just be able to just, go from person to person and have relationships that, we're going together, whatever. That's actually bringing up the last question. What of the common idea of trying out marriage by living together? I mean, when we understand the proper role that marriage plays, the other one is just pretend. It's just playing house. It's not real. And they can get together and say, well, we're going to live together to see if you can have a relationship together. That's not what tells you. You can't know that by if you have a good roommate, because that's not what marriage is. You're not going to make the commitment to be one united, one together, one mind, and you're going to make all sacrifices of everything else for that one person if you are actually making a commitment together. Because how are you going to commit to someone that you're going to spend your life lovingly devoting yourself to their betterment, knowing that they may leave in 3 weeks because they're not happy with you? That's not even part of the discussion. So when we were getting married, Carla and I, we had a lot of marriage counseling. One of the decisions we made is we would never say the D word. We'd never say divorce. Never. It's not something we throw around. We never have ever used it in any kind of discussion. It is not on the table at all, period. Yeah. Paul. Hallmark Society. Yeah, that's right. Hallmark movies are not real, but boy, they want you to think they are. Yes.